Hi, I'm Galit Kaunitz,
And I'm Jackie Wilson, and you're listening to Double Reed Dish
a podcast for oboists, bassoonists.
and the people who love them. Hi, Bleed.
Hey, Jackie.
We are doing it. We are here on our podcast. Can you believe it?
I am so excited. First of all, also, I miss you.
I miss you too. Oh my gosh. But we'll get to see each other in April. We have
It's
a
true.
couple performances lined up in April, so that'll be
Mm-hmm.
very cool.
Mm-hmm. Yep. For the listeners who don't know us yet, I live in Mississippi and Jackie lives in Missouri. So we have a good 10 hours between us, which is hard for people who love each other as much as I love you.
Well, the feeling is mutual. Why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners a little bit?
I'm Galit Kaunitz, and I am the oboist of this duo. I teach oboe at the University of Southern Mississippi. This is currently my second year of teaching at USM. I love it so much. I love my students and my colleagues, and the only thing I don't love is being really far away from you.
I'm the only thing that you're sad to be far away from. I'm sure your family will feel fantastic about that. Glad to know
Hey,
I rank the
Mom.
highest above all.
Hey, Mom and Dad, love you.
And you just got done preparing and performing the Strauss
Oh,
concerto.
I sure did.
How was
It
that?
was about 2 weeks ago, almost 2 weeks ago, and it was a very long journey. I started,
Are you still having nightmares?
no, but I was having nightmares before, but the nightmares have gone away. I started preparing 6 months ago, and I really, at the time, felt like that was not enough time. Like 6 months ago, I was freaking out like, oh my God, I can't believe I waited this long. But in the end, it turned out really great. The performance was really good and the experience was really good. And I had a 40 read goal. Um,
Right.
and I'm so sad to say I did not end up meeting my goal. I got to 36 and I would have gotten to 40 except I had a lot of cracking reads at the end and I just could not in good conscience count them. So I had 36. But it was really worth it because I learned a lot about what I need out of a read. And that piece is so athletic and such a beast that I got to be a lot more picky than I normally allow myself to be. So it really changed my perspective on read making and what a good read actually does for me. So all in all, it was a really great experience. I'm so glad I did it. I got to wear a beautiful red dress and go out on stage and play with these incredible students. And then I got to go home and go to sleep, and it was awesome.
Yeah, I bet after you do something like that, you feel like you could play anything, like bring it on, whatever it is,
Yeah,
I
I
can do
kind
it.
of do feel like that. Like nothing is ever going to make me more nervous than that. So,
Very
yeah, what's going
cool.
on with you?
Well, for our listeners, I am Jackie Wilson, and I teach at Southeast Missouri State University in Cape Girardeau. This is also my second year of teaching, and in fact, Galit and I know each other because we worked together in a previous position, left at the same time, and of course kept in touch and remained great friends. I love my job too. I'm very happy. My job, I think like probably a lot of other double reed players, requires me to wear many hats. And so I'm balancing applied teaching and performing with also a course load of several courses while my studio hopefully grows. So I've got a lot of different things on my plate, but all things that I'm excited about. So
So
that's very
basically, you
cool.
have a ton of free time.
Exactly. All the free time in the world. And yes, it's just easy street, not a
You just
problem.
performed a concerto, didn't you?
I did. It's not quite comparable to the Strauss. My bassoon friends will know the Weber Andante and Hungarian Rondo. It's a very standard piece. And I got to play that with the St. Louis Wind Symphony, which was very cool. I had an awesome experience, but not really like the Strauss in that, most of us will learn that work in our undergraduate degree, maybe even high school. I know some high schoolers who've performed it. And yeah, it's not without its challenges, but it's pretty standard repertoire and very familiar, and I've performed it many times. But audiences love it, and the thing I love about that concerto is it's so wonderfully orchestrated. The bassoon is, as you know, sometimes hard to project and hear over a large ensemble, and especially I was playing with a band. So the orchestration, and it's theme and variation, so you take turns. I play a variation and the orchestra or band plays a 2D section, and vice versa. So you really get to relax and shine and just sit back. So it was fun. It was not the stress of preparing the Strauss oboe concerto, though. I will concede to
It
that,
still sounds like a
definitely.
lot of fun.
But I was so inspired by that read journal that you
Yeah.
kept. You posted online, and the listeners can find it under your hashtag
Yes.
Strauss
Hmm.
Strategies, which you use to kind of chronicle your preparation. And maybe you can expand upon this, but I loved you used different columns to grade, and you started with like the biggest level of
Hmm.
acceptable versus unacceptable.
I went through every single read, and I made two big columns. Like you said, one was acceptable and the other one was unacceptable. And then I broke each one of those large columns into two smaller columns. So there was excellent and good in the acceptable column, and then um, fair, or no, moderate and poor. And I ended up having kind of a nice little bell curve, which, I should say that I had also numbered all of my staples so that I could identify which one was which. And so I just started ranking them and putting them in the columns, and that actually really helped me figure out what is a deal breaker in a read and what isn't. Because, I had to make a decision. Is this moderate? Is this poor? Is it okay?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I had originally put 6 reads out of the 36 in the excellent column, and I went back and looked at them again the next day, and I ended up moving 2 of those into the good
Mm-hmm.
column because they were crowing a little flat, and I didn't really trust them to be able to hold the pitch up in the high register. So I had 4 reads that I thought were probably good enough to perform on. And out of
Mm-hmm.
those 4, 2 stood out more than the other 2. And the one that I ended up playing on was number 18. And I had made it the week before. So it was probably in the middle of its life because I would make the reeds and play on them a little bit and then put them away and not really touch them. I wasn't wearing out any
Okay.
one reed over another. So they had a pretty long lifespan, all things considered. And yeah, I ended up playing on number 18. And to be honest with you, it didn't really feel comfortable until the dress rehearsal the night before. It felt like it finally broke in during the dress rehearsal, and I said, you know what? I think I'd be comfortable playing on this one tomorrow, and that's what I did. I ended up having my concert read, a backup read that I could use in case I knocked my good read on my teeth or something, and then a backup to my backup, which I was crossing my fingers
Mm-hmm.
that I would not have to use because the challenge in the Strauss is that you don't have the energy to um, manage your read. It's just, it has to do everything automatically. Response was the most important thing to me, and then intonation, and then tone. So I needed to
Mm-hmm.
have something that responded with absolutely no hesitation in every register, something that played in tune without me having to do anything weird with my tongue or with my embouchure, and it needed to have a beautiful sound also. So I think, it was kind of frustrating in the end because I had made 36 reads, and in the end, there was only like 2 that I would consider playing the concerto on.
Well, the thing I always say with my students, I use this metaphor that selecting a read is like dating, in that, sometimes we hang on for a little bit too long. The relationship is dead. It's done. We need to let go. We don't always want to let go, you know. Sometimes we want to act like something has a little bit more potential than it actually does. um, when you find the right one, there's nothing like it. But the really important thing is when you figure out it is not working, you need to move on. Don't try to turn, something that is not going to play for you into, don't kid yourself, essentially, in terms of reads. And it's actually a pretty, extensive metaphor when you apply it, but it almost always works. And so I'll say, will you date this read? So one of the things we want to do on this podcast every episode is give you a couple shout outs of things that we love or have been helpful in our everyday lives as performers and teachers, and see if they help you as our listeners. So Galit, what are you shouting out this week?
I have 2 shout outs this week that I'm super grateful for. And to give you a little background information, I'm having an awesome week because I get to sub with the Louisiana Philharmonic in New Orleans. And the oboe section sounds amazing. And not only do they sound amazing, but they are really nice people. So I'm really excited to be playing the planets with them. And I'm playing English horn. And I would like my first shout out to go to my English horn read, which is really coming through for me, especially today in rehearsal. It articulated when I wanted it to, it was in tune, and it sounded good enough to match the beautiful sounds coming out of the rest of the section. So I am very grateful to that read. Thank you, Reed. Please keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Reed.
And my second shout out is to my trusty car. I was not at all concerned that I was going to get to rehearsal on time, that I was going to get home safely because it is 2 hours away. So I would like to thank my car and to ask it to also please keep doing what it is doing. Jackie, what are yours?
This week, I'm going to shout out all the students who did not get a fall break. So most universities,
that is a really good one.
Yes, they either have a fall break, which is like a little 3-day weekend in October, and then a shorter Thanksgiving, or some schools like SEMO have a week-long Thanksgiving but no break until then. So this is actually a newer thing. They used to have a fall break. My students are all used to a fall break, but this is the second year that we've had an entire week for Thanksgiving, which is nice. It's nice to get an entire week off. But Galit, by this point in the semester, my students are crawling across the finish line. They are tired, they are worn out, they are burnt out mentally, they are just ready for a break. So I'm shouting out my students who are pushing through that fatigue to end their semester strong. You can do it. We believe in you.
You really can do it, truly. But I understand how tired they are. We were both there.
Yes, yep. We were there, and your teachers are tired too, so cut them some slack.
And we love you, and we're supporting you, and just hang on. You can make it.
Definitely. Well, speaking of awesome double read players, we have an awesome guest for this first episode. I am so excited that he agreed to be on the podcast. Andrew Brady, principal bassoon of the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. How excited are you?
Really excited. I've met Andrew once, and I remember this was a different time. I was subbing with the LPO, actually the only other time, and I remember walking into the rehearsal room, and I was hearing this bassoonist warm up on stage, and I stopped in my tracks, and I said, "Who is playing?" Because they are amazing. It was just scales. He was just playing scales, and I could not even walk. It was so beautiful. So I'm super excited to talk to him.
well, you stopped in your tracks and then you sent me a
Yes, I did.
text. I specifically remember the principal bassoonist in the LPO, which he was at the time, is amazing. And of course, I knew that was my good friend Andrew. I actually met Andrew when he was a wee lad, a teen. And during my master's degree at Boston University, my teacher, the amazing, the incomparable Matthew Ruggiero, rest in peace, we love you, invited me to be his teaching assistant for the Tanglewood workshop for the high school bassoons. And Andrew was one of the bassoonists who attended that workshop. And even then, you would think, I believe he was a sophomore in high school. He was jaw-droppingly, I'm trying to make sure I say that, jaw-droppingly talented, compelling, musical. It was just amazing. It was like, even then, you could tell this was a special talent, a special musician. I remember the students had a series of sessions, and then of course, like any camp, they would go to lunch or they'd have social time. And Dr. Ager and I, one day we were picking up, cleaning up the room after the students had left, and he looks at me and he goes, "That student Andrew." And I was like, I know. We were just like, holy moly. And so actually, Andrew and I have stayed in touch ever since, and I just couldn't be prouder of his trajectory. Couldn't be prouder, but also couldn't be less surprised. It was just like, yes, of course, this is where you should be letting everyone hear your music. So if you are in the Atlanta area, or if you can reasonably drive, you need to hear this guy play, because you will not regret
Yeah,
it. He's just
I
phenomenal.
couldn't agree more. I wish that I lived closer to Atlanta so I could go hear him. Maybe someday. Maybe someday I'll be able to. I think it's 6 hours away. So maybe someday. It is my utmost pleasure to welcome Andrew Brady to the podcast. Andrew is the principal bassoonist of the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. Andrew, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, such as what you do and a little bit about how you got there?
Well, thank you, Galit and Jackie, for having me. It's really a pleasure to be able to talk to you both. It's been a while since I've been able to chat with you, but it's good to hear you. Um, so, as you said, Galit, I am the principal bassoonist with the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, and I just started in January. Well, I say just, but it's actually been a few months, so it's not so new. Um, But around this time last year, I was completing my trial. I was playing the Verdi Requiem with the orchestra, and that's when I found out I got the job. So it's been about a year since I knew I would be moving to Atlanta. Before I was here, I was in New Orleans. I was the bassoonist with Louisiana Philharmonic. And prior to that, I went to the Colburn School in Los Angeles. I'm originally from Tennessee, and I started on saxophone in sixth grade. And eventually, I knew that I wanted to be in an orchestra, um, and that saxophone was not going to get me there unless I only played Prokofiev or some other thing that had saxophone in it. So I switched to bassoon, and we can get into the details of why I did that later. But that's just a general overview, I guess, the short version.
Very cool. Andrew, you've had a lot of success at a relatively young age. Um, I wonder if you might talk to us a little bit about your approach to goal setting, to practice, to your career, just to kind of contextualize this amazing path that you've had. I'm sure people would be really interested in how you went about forging that.
Sure. Yeah, I was very, very goal oriented from the beginning, especially after I switched to bassoon. Um, so I was at a band clinic and I was playing saxophone and I saw a bassoonist in front of me and I thought it looked cool. So that's why I wanted to switch. So I made the switch in eighth grade. And from that point, I got a teacher. His name is Anthony Parther that I studied with. And I remember having this kind of calendar planner kind of thing, and in the back there's a section for notes, and I went through and had goals, like short-term goals, like within the next 3 months or so, and then midterm, like 5 to 10 years, and then lifetime kind of goals lastly. Um, and I kept updating and going back to that, looking at that, to see that I was on track for where I wanted to be. Um, I also made sure to practice very, very consistently. When I started bassoon, I was so in love with it. I mean, I started it for the way it looked, and then I fell in love with the sound. So once I was really loving the sound, I would play for, I don't know, man, I don't know how long, at least 3 hours a day, 3 or 4. Most of the time, it would end up being that I would practice, and my parents would tell me, or yell at me rather, to stop because dinner was ready. But most of the time, I was not ready to stop. So I've always been very dedicated to practicing. Um, I think I learn a lot from the process of practicing, even more so than performing. I think I get even more out of that process. Um, it gives you a lot of feedback, especially if you like record yourself, which I was doing a lot of, or play for friends, which I also did quite a bit. Um, so I had people tell me that it was possible for me to get a job before I left school, and I didn't quite believe them. It felt like there was a bigger gap from where I was to where I needed to be to get a job than I could close within that short time period. But as it happened, uh, the Louisiana Phil audition was the week before graduation, so I went out and played an audition on, I believe it was a Sunday, Monday. Flew back to Los Angeles, had a recital, did finals, and graduated. And then after that, packed up all my stuff and moved to New Orleans. And it was kind of a whirlwind. It was very crazy to me. Uh, but it's looking back, I think definitely the way that I approached practicing, um, and playing for people and just being so consistent. I think that's what got me where I am. Also, the experiences I had, such as at BUTI, where I first met Jackie, um, and other music festivals, I think those really helped prepare me and kind of helped me gauge where I was, not only within the bassoon world, but within the entire orchestral scene.
When you were a student, did you have a person or maybe more than one person who was especially encouraging about you becoming a musician? I know a lot of students don't believe that they can do it like you were just describing, and I'm wondering if your belief that you could do it was more internal or if you had some teachers or mentors who really encouraged you and helped you believe that it was possible.
I think I had quite a number of people to encourage me. A lot of it was self-motivation because I've always loved music. Um, when I was especially young, I would. First of all, I told my mom I wanted to sing tender in the church choir rather than tenor. So there was always the singing from the very beginning, and then also I would invite people over to my house after church for concerts on my porch, um, which would have been great, and it was great, except my parents never knew when I was going to do it. So random people would just show up at our house, and I would, play my little tambourine for them and dance and sing and all these things. So it was very self-motivated, but also there were so many people um, who I had an example from, like my aunts, and actually my whole family is musical. Not all of us are professional musicians, but I had two aunts that sang on Broadway. My mom played clarinet in high school. My dad played euphonium. So it's always been there. So I had those examples to follow. Um, then also, like I mentioned before, BUTI, I was there with Jackie and Matthew Ruggiero, who was a really, really big influence for me, actually. Um, that was the first kind of bassoon intensive camp that I went to. I'd gone to Eastern Music Festival before, and there there were 8 of us bassoons, and we had like master classes and things like that. But when I went to BUTI, it was for 2 weeks. It was solely just bassoon master classes, and then orchestra started later. So I got to work quite a bit with Matthew Ruggiero, and he was very encouraging. He pulled me aside actually at the time. I was playing on a school instrument. I didn't have my own. Um, and I was looking, I've got to go to college soon and I have to have an instrument. Um, and he was like, I think that you're on a great path. You're practicing well, and I want to help you out as much as I can. So if you need anything, like regarding bassoon, like if I can help you in any way, um, like helping to pay for an instrument, because at that time my dad had just gotten laid off, um, so we lost a source of income. Matthew Ruggiero just pulled me aside and told me all these things, and it was so encouraging um, to hear that and know that it's a viable option, and that I wasn't just dreaming about something that might never happen. So he was a really big influence. Also, the bassoonists in the Boston Symphony who did the second bassoon um, camp that next summer that I went to BTI, Suzanne Nelson, Rick Ranty, and Richard Svoboda, and Mr. Henniger as well. They were all extremely supportive. And hearing the Boston Symphony at that age when I was in high school and getting to get the Tanglewood experience was one of the most memorable things of my life, I believe. Um, so high school years, those people were all very influential, as well as my band directors back at home. And then teachers at Colburn were always so supportive. I played for as many people and as many teachers as possible. Um, it didn't matter to them, that I wasn't a violinist or a clarinetist. They were willing to listen and give feedback, and they just wanted everyone at the school to do well, um, which I think should be the goal. So I think they did that very well. Um, but yeah, it's been great to have so much support from so many people, um, and I think it's a mixture of my own self motivation and then all the support from everyone else, my friends, family, teachers, that has really helped propel me forward.
Andrew, I wonder, one thing that Galit and I talk about in our friendship a lot, and also that I'm constantly discussing with my students, is this notion of imposter syndrome. And I wonder if you might talk to us about if you've had any experience with imposter syndrome, or if not, how you've been able to sidestep that. I'm just curious about your experiences with that.
That's a great question, and I'm so glad you asked it. I was thinking of maybe bringing it up, but I'm glad you just brought it up. I've definitely had experiences with imposter syndrome. Um, it's very common, I think, when musicians go to school, go to college and grad school to, kind of get sucked up into this whole idea that everything has to be perfect and that, everything has to be fixed right away, which with some things that just can't happen because they need time. You need time to mature as a person and as a musician. And it's so easy to get caught up in that, and so you start feeling like what you're doing is unacceptable. Even when you may be, getting recognition, winning competitions or doing well in competitions and having good performances, it's easy to feel like it's by chance. Um, I mean, even it kind of it's almost cyclical, maybe, at least in my experience. Um, Even just recently. as recently as 3 weeks ago. Um, I was really feeling like, man, how did I like get to where it just doesn't feel like what I'm producing is enough to sustain me where I am, or like to get me in this to this job with Atlanta. And I got very, very down on myself about it. Reads just weren't feeling right, and it felt like anytime I played, it just took so much more effort than I remembered it taking, and I think I was just so in my head, rather than just breathing and thinking about the music. I was thinking so much about mechanics. Um, Playing in tune, coming in on time, all of those things, which are very important, but can be a hindrance, I think, when you think about them too much, um, especially when you're in this stage of, college or grad or post grad, and you, at this point, you know how to do those things, hopefully. If you've had teachers and been practicing well, then hopefully at this point you already know how to do those things. And it's just allowing yourself to trust that it's all going to be there. You still have to practice them, but I think focusing on them too much and kind of dialing in on one thing and really going hard at it, I think that can be detrimental. Um, and what got me out of that funk that I was in, I got a Facebook Live notification, and it was from, I think it was Carnegie Hall, that Joyce DiGiannato was giving a master class. She was in New York for the Richard Tucker opera gala or celebration, and she was doing a master class. And she was talking with one singer about breathing, because this particular person was having trouble making it through a phrase, and she just was feeling tense. And so what Joyce did, she said, don't think about breathing. Just don't think about tanking up, trying to get as full as you can with the air. Just think about the what's going on in the music. And she had this, she would kind of just go tick 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 in tempo with whatever the music was doing, and told the singer to think about that, just the tick tick tick, and instantly the singer was able to breathe naturally. Things felt relaxed. She was making long phrases. Um, and so I saw that and I just was like, oh, I wonder if that would work for bassoon, because I've been having trouble recently feeling loose and relaxed and getting large breaths. Um, so I took out my bassoon and practiced what Joyce said, and it was like a revelation. Like everything was immediately better. And I don't think it's because um, or rather, I think it's because I wasn't so focused on, you know, getting the attack just right or the breath to be as full as possible. It was more about relaxation and going with the music. So I think it's uh, it's always good to have outside influences like that, especially outside of your instrument. Um, Even though we don't have the exact same mechanics. Um, and in fact, that can be a good thing, because I don't necessarily breathe the same way a singer does, but the way that she was able to get them to relax and just focus on the music translates to every instrument or every vocal type. Um, so imposter syndrome is very, very real, and I think it's normal. Um, I think you have to listen to your friends and your colleagues and your teachers when they're telling you that it's not as bad as it seems, because it's always terrible to yourself in your head, way worse than it actually is. And it's so hard to just trust yourself. But that trust is something that's so important, and you have to keep working at it, to be able to just let things go and rely on what you've already done, all the work you've done, and just be relaxed.
Wow, I really love that. And it's actually really encouraging to know that you have it sometimes too.
Yeah.
It's very isolating sometimes.
Hmm.
So leave it to the oboe player to bring up reeds. But this is now your second position in a major American orchestra. And I would love to know a little bit about your approach to reed making. Um, Perhaps it has evolved throughout your days as a student and then a professional. I would love to hear a little bit about that.
Sure. So I currently am playing on, if we want to get into the nitty-gritty, I'm playing on Goltzer shape reeds, which are a bit wider in the throat and a bit uh, more flare than what I was playing on before at the tip. Um, and the reason for that is coming to Atlanta, this orchestra has such a Germanic tradition of sound and style. Big influence here from the Cleveland Orchestra, and so they like really dark, big sounds here. Um, and it's a wonderful wind section to play in. But when I got here, that was not the style that I was playing. When I was in school, and when for a little bit when I was in New Orleans, I was playing completely Hertzberg um, style reeds, so a little bit smaller, um, more suited for mid-range and upper range playing than low range. I felt I was giving up a bit in the low range. I had to compensate a little bit too much. So at one point, I switched to a knock-and-hour shape, which is a little bit wider. Um, and then also at that time, my sound was just a little bit more. It had more of the highs in the sound. So when I came here, I was really and still am searching for that balance of having a lot of core to the sound and a lot of bottom, but also retaining the sparkle on top, so you can project into the hall and still have that ring that makes the sound really interesting to listen to. So I'm still kind of transitioning. I've changed a few things, especially over the summer. I took some time to make some changes. Like this is not particularly reed related, but I had bent my vocals up at kind of an angle so that they weren't when they come from heckle, they're kind of um, at a downward angle entering your mouth, which it just didn't feel comfortable to me. So I bent them up when I got them, and then I was talking with the bassoon repairman, and he said, "Well, yeah, I guess that like kind of lessens resistance." So that the sound might spread a little bit more. It's not as easy to get the meaty, dark part of the sound. So over the summer, I bent my vocals back down and I got more resistance. I also switched which side of the reed I was playing on um, for, well, I guess oboe players know this too. I don't know if you purposefully scrape your reeds this way, but there's always a stronger and a weaker side. So I switched sides. I always just refer to them as smiley and frowny based on which is the more curved side. So I was playing smiley, and now I'm playing frowny. And I think now there's a little bit more resistance, and the tone is more similar note to note, and I feel like I can just blow rather than manipulate too much with my embouchure. Um, so I'm still processing all these changes right now, still experimenting, um, and I'm actually looking for a Goltzer shaper. So all you out there who are listening, if you know of anywhere I can get a Goltzer shaper, let me know. Because the one I'm borrowing currently it belongs to Carl Nietzsche, who was the principal bassoonist before me. Well, there's Carl Nietzsche and then Keith Bunke. Um, and then me. So this is it's his shaper, and he's going to need it back eventually. So I'm looking for something that I can use because I really like the results that I've gotten on this Goltzer shape.
Andrew, I wonder if you could tell us what music you enjoy listening to.
So my favorite music to listen to is Baroque music, and specifically French Baroque um, and French Baroque opera. So Rameau is my probably my number one, and Couperin and Lully and all these other uh, big guys from the French Baroque era. And then also I like Handel and Bach, Telemann, Um, Italian Baroque as well. So that's my go-to listening if I'm like making reads or just trying to relax. And then I also have uh, a lot to listen to for work, which is actually pretty varied. We do a lot of new music here under Robert Spano. He really is a big champion of new works. Um, so I have a lot of listening to do with ASO. And actually, tomorrow, I just remembered, um, my first recording that I did with ASO is going to be released from, I think it's on iTunes. Um, I know they were putting some things on YouTube, but I'm not sure if that'll be on there. But it's a CD of Jonathan Leshnoff's music, his Symphony Number 2, and his oratorio Zohar. Um, which both I think we premiered both of them last year. The symphony was actually the very first thing I played on my trial, and if you take a listen to it, you'll know that it was kind of hard to just walk in and play that. You'll see what I mean once you hear it. But yeah, so I do a lot of varied listening. Most of it is classical music. Um, Sometimes if I just want to, you know, get away from classical music, I'll listen to I guess R&B or things like Whitney Houston and Patti LaBelle, those kinds of people I grew up with.
Andrew, what advice would you give to people, students, and probably also non-students, people beyond their student career who aspire to have a career like yours?
I would say you have to be extremely dedicated, um, really put in the hours of work, of practice, and also that includes listening to recordings, recording yourself, playing for other people, score study. Um, all of those things are really important to make sure that you're prepared, and that you know what's going on so that when you get into these types of situations, you feel as comfortable as you can. Walking into an orchestra is not always the most comfortable thing, especially if it's new. Um, so it's best to set yourself up for success as much as possible. So, listen to more than one orchestra do a recording of this piece that you're about to play, or really talk to a composer or a conductor about the score study or any questions you have about it. All those things can really help you um, feel like you know what you're doing and actually help you know what you're doing, which is always important when there are so many other things at play when you sit down in orchestra.
Awesome. Andrew, my last question for you is, can you tell us about a favorite musical memory of a past performance that you have, something that you hold in your heart as a special performance?
Yeah, so I'll actually give you a twofer. So I'll give you a favorite and then a terrifying. So a favorite was one of my last concerts at Colburn, and it was Tchaikovsky 5 with Gustavo Dudamel, and we played in the LA Phil Hall, Walt Disney Concert Hall. That was just an amazing experience. He really brought out a lot of great music making from the orchestra, and it was just incredible to be a part of. Um, and then for the terrifying music experience, I was playing Haydn, I think it was Haydn 80. It was a D minor symphony. I was playing that with the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra in New York, and as you might know, it's a conductorless group. So we were sitting down. Also about this group, the wind players and the strings, I guess, switch seating from piece to piece. So there will be a different concertmaster from one piece to the next, or a different principal flute. So the music gets kind of jumbled up sometimes. So you have to, I'm sitting over here for this piece, so I have to set my first bassoon part on the second oboe stand or something like that. So we sit down to play Haydn 80, and my part is nowhere to be found. Um, and the concertmaster is looking back to make sure everything is good, everybody's ready to go, and I just have this wide-eyed look on my face, and I'm just like flailing around trying to find the music. I ask the people in front of me and to the sides of me. Nobody can find it in their folders. So luckily, the first bassoon part was pretty similar to the second bassoon part, and I just read the second bassoon part, and like where we had thirds, I just kind of tried to remember what they were. I think there was one like really glaring um, note that was very incorrect, but for the most part, I managed to get through, and I remembered the solos because I'd practiced them. So that was fine, but I never want to be in that situation again. It was like every musician's worst nightmare come true. But looking back, it's kind of funny now.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I can't think of a better first guest. Well, that's all we have for this time. Make sure you turn in on December 15th for our next episode. And make sure that you follow us on social media at Double Reed Dish. We're on Facebook. You can find our SoundCloud page. And also make sure to shoot us an email at doublereeddish@gmail.com. We want to hear your questions, anything you'd like us to discuss on the podcast, shout out suggestions, anything. Send us an email. We'd love to hear from you.
Until next time, may your reeds be vibrant and your instruments be perfectly adjusted. Bye.
Bye.